Waitress took a slap meant, for the Alpha King's mother. The revenge that followed left the entire kingdom speechless. Nobody at table 7 remembered her name. That was the thing about Nadia. She moved the right way. Quiet, efficient, invisible. And that was exactly how she liked it. She had spent 4 years at the Celestia Grand Hotel learning how to disappear in plain sight. Refill the water before anyone notices it's low. Smile when the kitchen is 30 minutes behind. Don't look directly at the guests, the way you don't look directly at the sun. She was 26. She wore her hair pinned flat so it wouldn't fall in the food. Her shoes had a small tear on the left heel that she had re-glued 3 times. She caught the 11:45 bus home every night and ate whatever was left in the staff kitchen before the cleaners cleared it. She was nobody, and she was okay with that. She had learned, the hard way, that being somebody cost more than she could afford. The night of the gala, the Celestia held 2 kinds of events. There were the ones where regular people came in wearing their best and tried to act like they belonged. Anniversaries, small company dinners, birthday parties where the birthday person always cried a little, which Nadia had stopped finding strange after the 2nd year. And then there were the other kind, the kind where the flowers alone cost more than Nadia made in a month, where the guest list was handled by a separate department, where 3 managers hovered near the entrance with earpieces and expressions like men waiting to be fired. The Blackthorn Charity Gala was the other kind. The Blackthorn family was the kind of name that didn't need explaining in this city. They had been here before the hotels, before the high-rises, before the roads. Old money so old it had almost become something else. Not wealth exactly, but weight. The kind of presence that makes a room rearrange itself before the person even walks in. Nadia had been assigned to the east wing of the main ballroom, tables 9 through 17. She had her section memorized. She knew the menu, she knew the wine list, she knew that table 12 had a guest with a nut allergy, and that table 15 had requested a different tablecloth after the first one was set, because the color was apparently incorrect. She did not know, going into that evening, that she would end the night with a bruise on her face that would change the rest of her life. But that was the thing about nights like that. They never announced themselves. Table 1 was not her table. Table 1 was never anyone's table, technically. It was the table closest to the main stage, set apart from the others by a small gap that the event coordinator called breathing room and that Nadia privately called the moat. It seated 8. It had its own dedicated server, a man named Franco who had been at the Celestia longer than anyone and who moved through difficult situations the way water moves around a rock, quietly and without friction. The Blackthorn family sat at table 1. The older woman, the matriarch, the one everyone called Lady Riva, though she had never asked anyone to call her anything, sat at the center of the table. She was somewhere in her early 70s, though she wore it the way certain women do, not fighting it, not performing youth, just existing in it, with a kind of settled calm that made other people feel slightly nervous. Silver hair, pulled back, a deep green dress. Hands that were still and folded on the table in front of her like a woman who had learned very early that stillness was its own kind of power. She did not laugh loudly. She did not gesture much. She asked quiet questions and listened to the answers in full, which was, in Nadia's observation, rarer than it should have been at a table like that. Nadia passed table 1 twice that evening to move between service stations. She registered all of this the way she registered everything, in her peripheral vision, logged and filed, not really thought about. She was thinking about her section, about the wine service on table 11, about the fact that table 14 had asked for bread 3 times and she was running out of tactful ways to say the kitchen was backed up. She was not watching table 1 when the woman arrived. The woman in red, her name, Nadia would learn later, was Petra Voss. She arrived the way certain women at certain events always arrive, late enough to be noticed, early enough not to seem like the arrival was calculated. Red dress, diamonds at the throat, the kind of walk that comes from a lifetime of knowing that a room is watching. She was seated at table 4. She did not stay there. Nadia heard it before she saw it. Not the words, the shift in the room's sound. The ballroom had been running at a steady hum all evening, the particular white noise of 100 expensive conversations happening at once, and then at some point in the middle of dessert service, that hum changed frequency, like a radio between stations. She looked up. Petra Voss was standing at table 1. She had a champagne glass in one hand. She was saying something in a voice pitched low enough to be private and loud enough to be heard. The people at the surrounding tables had gone very still, in the way that people go still when they want to watch something without appearing to watch it. Lady Riva sat with the same stillness she had carried all evening. Nadia could not hear the words. She did not need to. She had worked enough rooms to read the body language from 30 feet away. Petra Voss was not visiting. She was not making polite conversation. She was delivering something. The champagne glass was tilted at a slight angle, which meant the hand holding it was shaking slightly, which meant the anger underneath the red dress was working harder to stay dressed than Petra was letting on. Franco, the dedicated server, was not at table 1. Nobody from the event staff was anywhere near table 1. Lady Riva was saying something back, very quietly, and Nadia could see from the set of her jaw that it was calm and measured, and probably reasonable, which was clearly making things worse. Petra Voss's hand rose. Nadia was already moving. She didn't decide to move. That was the thing she would try to explain later, and always fail to explain correctly. It was not a decision. It was more like something her body did before her brain finished the sentence, the way you flinch from heat before you've processed that the thing is hot. She crossed the space between her station and table 1 in 8 steps. She stepped in front of Lady Riva. The slap landed on her left cheek. It was not a small slap. The champagne glass hit the marble floor. The sound it made was the kind of sound that stops a room. Not loud exactly, just final. Nadia stood there. Her cheek was on fire. There were spots at the edge of her vision. She was still holding the small linen cloth she'd had in her hand during dessert service, and she was gripping it now in a way that was probably going to leave marks on her palm. But she didn't let go. She did not fall. She did not step back. The room was absolutely silent. What happened right after it is strange. The things you notice when your cheek is ringing and the room is staring at you. Nadia noticed that one of the champagne glass pieces had landed near the base of Lady Riva's chair and that it was the right size and shape to cut someone who didn't see it. She noted this the way she noted everything on the floor during service. Automatically, filed for retrieval. She noticed that Franco had appeared from somewhere behind the stage door and was walking toward table 1 with the particular expression of a man doing rapid calculations. She noticed that Petra Voss had gone very still. The hand that had swung was now hanging at her side. Her face had gone through something complicated and was now settling somewhere between rage and a kind of shock, the look of someone who had expected the impact to land differently and was disoriented by the result. Security arrived in under a minute. They were polite about it. They always were, at events like this. Polite and immovable. Petra Voss was guided, not dragged, not pushed, just firmly accompanied, toward the side exit, and she went, saying things that grew quieter as the distance grew, until she was gone, and the side door closed, and the room began, very carefully, to exhale. Someone was talking to Nadia, her manager, a man named Derek, who she had worked under for 2 years, and who was a decent man in a difficult job, and who was currently looking at her with the expression of someone who has woken up to find their house partially on fire and is still deciding whether to be grateful it isn't fully on fire. "Are you all right?" he said, which was not entirely a question. "I'm fine," she said, which was not entirely true. He gave her ice wrapped in a linen napkin, the good ones, the ones they kept for the front tables, soft and thick, and told her, in a very careful voice, that it might be better if she took the rest of the evening away from the floor. That the guests had seen enough disruption for one night, that he would have her clocked out at full hours. She understood what he was actually saying. She took the ice. She went to the back hallway, the long one that ran behind the service kitchen and smelled permanently of dish soap and something vaguely electrical. She sat down on the bench they kept there for staff breaks. She held the ice to her cheek. She was thinking about the bus. The 11:45 to the Westfield stop. If she left in the next 20 minutes she would make it. If she missed it, the next one wasn't until 12:30, and it was cold outside in a way that had been getting into her left knee for the past 2 winters. She was not thinking about what had just happened, or she was thinking about it the way you think about something you haven't processed yet, which is to say it was just sitting there, large and formless, and she was moving around it like a piece of furniture someone had left in the middle of the hallway. Lady Riva found her 12 minutes later. Nadia heard the footsteps first. They were not the quick, purposeful steps of Derek returning. They were slower, measured, the walk of someone who knows exactly where they are going and is in no particular hurry to perform the going. Lady Riva stood in the hallway entrance and looked at her. Nadia started to get up, the automatic reflex of a person in service attire encountering a guest in any space. "Please don't," Lady Riva said. "You don't have to do that." Nadia sat back down. Lady Riva came and sat next to her on the bench, not at a polite distance. Next to her. They sat there for a moment without either of them speaking, which should have been uncomfortable and was not, somehow. There was something about the older woman's stillness, that particular quality Nadia had noticed from across the room, that did not make silence feel like a gap to be filled. It just felt like silence. "What is your name?" Lady Riva said. "Nadia," she said. Lady Riva looked at the ice pack. She reached out and adjusted it slightly, with the calm efficiency of someone who has administered comfort many times and does not make a production of it. "That's going to bruise," she said. "I know." Another silence. "Why did you do it?" Lady Riva asked. Not like she was testing, like she genuinely wanted to know. Nadia thought about the question. She considered several answers. The truth was not any of them. Exactly. Or maybe it was all of them. "It was going to hit you either way," she said. "I was closer." Lady Riva was quiet for a long moment. "You could have moved back," she said. "Yes. You chose not to." Nadia didn't answer that. It didn't feel like a question. Lady Riva sat with it, the way she had sat with Petra Voss's words earlier, taking the thing in, not reacting to it, just letting it exist in the space between them. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. 4 years. "Do you like it?" Nadia considered this. It was not the question she expected. "I like parts of it," she said. "Which parts?" "When it goes well. When everything works and the guests don't notice anything because there's nothing to notice. That part." Lady Riva looked at her. "That's a very particular thing to love about a job," she said. "I know." They sat a little longer. Nadia checked the time in her head. She was going to miss the 11:45. She was going to sit in the cold for the 12:30. What the phone captured, she did not own a smartphone that could do what happened next, but 23 other people in that ballroom did. Nadia found out the next day, at 6 in the morning, when her phone started ringing with a number she didn't recognize. Then another number. Then her old university friend who she hadn't spoken to in 7 months. Then her cousin in a different city who generally texted 4 times a year. On her birthday, on New Year's, when something major happened in the family, and now apparently also when something became international news overnight. "Nadia," her cousin said, "are you okay? Did you see? Have you seen the video?" She had not seen the video. She watched it for the first time sitting on the edge of her bed in her apartment, still in the oversized shirt she slept in, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold because she'd forgotten to drink it. 11 seconds. That was all it was. Someone at one of the nearby tables had caught the last part. Petra Voss's hand coming up, the blur of Nadia crossing the frame from the left, the impact, the sound of the glass on marble, and then Nadia standing there, not moving, cheek red, still holding the linen cloth. It did not look dramatic in the way you might expect dramatic things to look. It looked very quiet. That was the thing that was getting people. The comments said things like, "She didn't even flinch." They said, "She didn't know who she was protecting, she just did it." They said, "That woman has more dignity in 11 seconds than most people manage in a lifetime." 4.2 million views by the time she finished her tea. By the time she showered and got dressed, it was 5.8. She sat down at her small kitchen table and looked at her phone and thought about the bus she'd caught at 12:30 the night before, and the cold that had gotten into her left knee, and the way she'd stood in the fluorescent light of the Westfield stop, and felt, more than anything, just tired. She had not felt significant. She had felt like a woman with a bruised cheek waiting for a bus. She was not sure which version of herself was more real. What it cost Petra Voss? Nobody announced it. That was the first thing Nadia noticed when she started paying attention to what was happening. There was no press release, no public statement, no quoted spokesperson. It happened the way things happen when powerful families decide something, not with noise, but with a particular quality of silence that is louder than any announcement. Petra Voss's husband had held 3 government contracts with Blackthorn Holdings for 11 years. Past tense. By Thursday. The word that came back through the city's social channels, quietly, through the people who talk to people who talk to people, was that the contracts were under review due to a compliance issue. Nobody specified the compliance issue. Nobody needed to. Then the charitable boards. Petra Voss had spent 20 years building a very specific kind of presence in this city. She was on 6 boards, 3 foundations, 2 annual galas that bore her name in the acknowledgments. She had photographs with ministers, with artists, with a visiting dignitary who had shaken her hand at an event 2 years prior and whose handshake she had mentioned in conversation probably more times than the dignitary would have liked. By the following weekend, she was on none of the boards. Not removed publicly, not with drama, just no longer listed. The way you notice a piece of furniture is gone only because something feels different about the room. She called it persecution. She called her lawyers, who advised her to be quiet. She called her friends. Her friends, it turned out, had developed sudden and urgent scheduling conflicts. This was the part that people in the city talked about, in the particular low-voiced way that people talk about things they don't want to seem like they enjoy, but clearly enjoy. Not the contracts, not the boards. The scheduling conflicts, the way a woman who had filled every room she walked into for 2 decades found herself walking into rooms that happened to have just emptied. Nobody did this to her, or rather, nobody had to. That was the thing about the Blackthorn. The letter had arrived on a Thursday, not in the mail, hand-delivered by a person Nadia had never seen before, who knocked on her apartment door at 9 a.m. and handed her a thick cream-colored envelope the way messengers in movies do, with both hands, as if the thing inside was either very valuable or very fragile. She almost didn't open it. She put it on her kitchen table and made coffee first. She drank half the coffee. She looked at the envelope. She picked it up and turned it over. The return address was a building name she recognized, the kind of building name that operates as its own category of information. She opened it. Inside was a single page. No letterhead, no official logo, just the clean cream paper and a small amount of text, the kind of letter that is brief, because whoever wrote it does not have to prove anything with volume. It said, "I understand you have been pursuing studies in hospitality management for 3 years, in the evenings, while maintaining full-time employment. I would like to offer full funding for the remainder of your program, tuition, accommodation during intensive terms, and applicable fees. A formal agreement will follow this letter through the appropriate channels. There is no obligation attached to this beyond the obvious one, which is that you finish what you started." At the bottom, in handwriting, "You already know how to lead rooms. This is just paper that says so." It was signed with a single initial. Nadia sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She was not thinking about the money, exactly. She was thinking about the 3 years. The Tuesday nights when she got home from class at 10:30 p.m. and had to be back at the hotel for 6 a.m. prep. The textbooks she had bought secondhand and annotated in 3 different pen colors because she ran out of highlighters and couldn't justify buying more. The assignment she had submitted late, just once, because a shift ran over and she'd had to choose, and she had chosen the shift because the shift was certain and the assignment was not. She thought about the words in the letter. You already know how to lead rooms. She had never thought about it that way. She had been thinking about it as learning to lead rooms. She had not considered that she might already be doing it, and that the degree was just the language other people would need before they could the last shift. She gave 3 weeks' notice. Derek took it with the expression of a man who is genuinely happy for someone and genuinely inconvenienced by the same news, which was a face she had watched him make about a lot of things over 2 years, and had come to find oddly comforting. "You're going to be good at whatever it is," he said. "Hospitality management," she said. He blinked. "You've been studying that the whole time you've been here?" 3 years. He looked at her for a moment, in a way that was slightly different from the way he had looked at her for the past 2 years. "Why didn't you say anything?" She thought about it. "I wasn't finished," she said. She worked the remaining 3 weeks in full. Every shift. She did not phone it in. She never had, but she especially didn't now, because endings are a kind of statement, and she wanted hers to say something specific. She wanted the floors she walked for the last time to be exactly as clean as the first time. She wanted the sections she had owned for 4 years to pass to the next person in the same condition she had received them. Her last night was a Tuesday. The kitchen made her a small cake. Someone had written her name on it in uneven frosting letters, the F slightly larger than the other letters for no apparent reason. The night staff stood around in the way people stand around in staff kitchens at 10 p.m., tired, fond, aware that they have to be back in 8 hours. Franco gave her a small speech that was mostly about what a stable and consistent worker she had always been, which was not the most romantic tribute, but which she found, for that reason, genuinely moving. She caught the 11:45 bus for the last time. She sat in her usual seat. She watched the city move past the window. She was not sad, exactly. She was something else, something she did not have a word for in any language she knew, which was the feeling of standing at the exact moment when one version of your life tips over into another and you can feel the weight shift. She got home. She set her alarm for 7. For the first time in 4 years, it was not set for 5:30. She did not know what to do with the extra time. She lay in bed and thought about it for a while. She slept better than she had in months. 2 years later, the Celestia hosted a lot of events. But on a warm evening in late spring, 2 years and a few months after the night of the Blackthorn Gala, the hotel held a charity auction for the Westfield Women's Foundation, a shelter and support center on the east side of the city, the same side Nadia had grown up on, the same side whose bus routes she had memorized over 4 years of 11:45 departures. The event was organized by the hotel's new director of special events. She was 28 years old. She was the youngest person to hold that title in the hotel's history, which the general manager had mentioned in a staff email with the kind of careful pride that institutional people use when they are genuinely proud of something but also aware that they did not cause it. The room that evening was not flashy. This was by design. Nadia had been very specific in the planning meetings. She did not want the event to feel like the events she had served at for 4 years, the ones where the money in the room was the point, where the cause being supported was the occasion, but the spectacle was the content. She wanted the cause to be the content. She had chosen shorter flower arrangements so the tables felt less formal. She had moved the stage slightly off-center so the room didn't feel like a performance hall. She had put the auction items on tables along the side walls rather than displayed at the front, so people would walk around and talk while they looked, rather than sitting in rows and being presented at. Small things. The kind of things that most guests wouldn't notice because they were designed not to be noticed. She noticed them. She stood near the service entrance and watched the room fill. She watched the way people moved in the space she had made for them. She watched a woman stop at one of the auction tables and pick up a photograph and stay there for a long time, looking at it. She watched 2 people who clearly didn't know each other start a conversation by a floral arrangement and exchange business cards 20 minutes later. She watched the room do what rooms do when they are set right. The thing in the drawer. She kept the linen napkin, the one from that night, the one that had wrapped the ice Derek had given her in the back hallway. She had walked out with it still in her hand and not noticed until she was standing at the Westfield bus stop, and by then it was too late to return it, and she had put it in her coat pocket and carried it home and put it in the top drawer of her bedside table and left it there. When she moved apartments a year later, she moved it to the top drawer of the small desk she bought secondhand from someone in her building. When the desk moved to her office, the napkin came with it. It was not folded neatly. It was not displayed. It sat in the back of the drawer behind the pens and the sticky notes and the small toolkit she kept for event emergencies. Nobody knew it was there. She didn't explain it to herself either, when she thought about it. It was just a napkin, soft, white, slightly worn at one corner from the number of times it had been washed before that night. But it was also the thing that had been in her hand when she decided, or didn't decide, or her body decided, or whatever version of deciding it had been, to step forward instead of back. She thought sometimes about what would have happened if she hadn't been holding it, if her hands had been empty, if the weight of the cloth had not been there, that small anchoring thing. She thought she probably still would have moved. That bravery is often not a clean thing. It is not a decision made clearly in a lit room. It is something that happens in what the city remembered. Cities have short memories for most things. Events blur, names fade. The thing everyone was talking about 6 months ago becomes a vague reference, something you half remember when a related story comes up, something you couldn't quite recount in detail if someone pressed you. But certain things stick, not because they were the biggest things, not because they involved the most powerful people. Sometimes a thing sticks because it arrived at exactly the right angle, the right 11 seconds, the right piece of footage, the right combination of someone with nothing to gain doing the one thing that required something of them. And it catches in the collective memory the way a splinter catches in skin. Small, specific, harder to remove than it has any right to be. People in that city would say, years later, that they remembered where they were when they first watched the video. Not because they were being dramatic, but because 11 seconds of a woman choosing to step forward had landed somewhere in them that they couldn't entirely explain and hadn't entirely left. Some of them had changed jobs after watching it. Some of them had called people they'd been avoiding calling. Some of them had just sat with it for a while and then gone on with their day. But the going on had been slightly different, in a way too small to describe and too real to deny. This is the effect of a person acting with integrity in a public place. Not inspiring speeches, already in motion deciding, for no strategic reason whatsoever, to move in a direction that cost them something. The thing nobody asked her. Every interview request, and there were many, asked some version of the same question. She declined all the interviews, not because she was afraid of attention exactly, because she had thought about what she would say and had come to the conclusion that whatever she said would be wrong in a way that nothing she stayed quiet about could be. The moment would be reduced to a quote. The quote would become a caption. The caption would become a meme or a motivational poster or a segment on a morning show where two people sat at an angle to each other and talked about things for 4 minutes before going to commercial. She did not want to be a segment. The question nobody asked. The one she thought about sometimes when she was planning events, or riding home on the bus, or standing in her office looking at the room she had built. What were you thinking in the moment right before? And the answer, which she had never said to anyone, she was thinking about the bus. She was thinking about her knee, and the cold, and the 11:45, and whether she would make it if the service wrapped on time. And in the middle of that completely ordinary thought, her eyes had caught the hand rising, and her feet had moved, and then she was standing there with a burning cheek, and the glass was on the floor, and the room was looking at her. There was no heroic internal monologue. There was no moment of conscious choice. There was a bus schedule and a hand in motion, and a body that had already decided. She thought this was, actually, the most honest thing about what had happened. That goodness, when it shows up in people, often shows up not as a decision but as a reflex. Not something they chose in a moment of moral clarity, but something their 4 years and their tired knees and their second-hand textbooks and their 11:45 buses had built into them so slowly and so quietly that they didn't know it was there until someone's hand was already moving. She had not known she was that person. Maybe that was the point. Maybe you never do. Nadia. Now she still takes the bus sometimes. Not because she has to. The office is close enough that she could walk, and on good days she does. But some mornings she catches the 7:20 from the Westfield stop and rides it through the east side, through the route she has taken enough times to have the stops memorized in her bones, and she sits in her usual window seat and watches the city do its morning things. The tea vendors setting up, the school kids in their uniforms, moving in clusters. The shop owners pulling up the metal shutters that sound the same in every city and every language she has ever heard one in. She watches all of it the way she has always watched things, from a slight remove, noticing the peripheral details, filing them away. Some things have changed. She no longer worries about the bus schedule at 11:45. She no longer reglues the heel of her left shoe. She has a desk with a drawer that holds, among other things, a soft white linen napkin that has been washed so many times it has gone slightly thin at one corner. Some things have not changed. She still prefers the rooms that run so well nobody notices them. She still thinks the best version of any event is the one where the guests go home talking about the conversation they had, not the centerpieces. She still believes, after everything, that invisibility is sometimes a form of competence and not a failure of ambition. She knows, now, that she is seen. She is not sure it changes anything fundamental about who she is. She is not sure it should. One last thing. The Westfield Women's Foundation raised more at that first gala than they had projected by 43%. Nadia did not attend the event as a guest. She was there the whole time, which is a different thing. She was near the service entrance, watching the room. She was in the kitchen at one point checking on a timing issue with the second course. She was at the back of the hall when the final auction item went for 3 times its estimated value, and the room made the kind of noise rooms make when something exceeds itself. She smiled at that. She did not make any remarks. She did not give a speech. She had written a few words in the event program, in the small organizer's note at the bottom of the second page that most guests don't read, which said, "This evening was made possible by a lot of people who did their jobs very well and did not ask to be thanked for it. You know who you are. This is the thanks." The staff found it later, after the guests had gone and the tables were being cleared. A few of them saved it on their phones. One of the kitchen workers, a young man on his first event with the hotel, read it 3 times and then put his phone away and went back to clearing the plates. He caught the 12:30 bus that night. His knee was fine. He was thinking about something. He wasn't sure what yet, but the thinking had started, and that, as Nadia could have told him, had he known to ask, had she been the kind of person who explains rather than shows, is usually where everything begins.